Arizona last week. As soon as we got home, my dad called on Sunday night and said, right in the middle of the and drove through this development lake that area. Like 2 days later, they got like 24 inches of snow. Wow. Oh, we had beautiful weather. I know. Yeah. It was. Yesterday. Oh, we drove up there. I had only about 20 hours. Good. Yeah, we went to Colorado and we did some of the Rocky Mountains and then I didn't even bring my own. Okay.
Somewhere else.
Yeah. But I don't. She could say I think that's all. Yeah. They did. And they the one on. There's actors, you know, because they love to shoot up with the balloons like on the street. And then there's people that are like that. Like. Yeah, so my brother and I went out for one night, so we back with him and stuff, and I remember thinking like at midnight, it's too cowboyish for me. Yeah. I can't imagine. It was exactly right. So they walked into the saloon and they had their gun to the bartender. They had no prize. No. You wonder if people do. I mean, they pulled them out and they had the windows and they had gold. Sure, you can go outside and take them out and then bring it back.
I heard that you.
Probably a good diet plan.
Yeah, and in fact, they're starting to take cards now. So I didn't know that would be. I think they're starting to accept cards and the one up here.
I wonder a lot more expensive than probably cost to me.
No pressure.
But
I never will now. My daughter was like, oh, when I was writing another check one day. She's like, I can't believe you still write a check.
she's all there.
Yeah, she was. She was like, how many I want to buy. So I bought one for grandparents, one for myself. And then there's the pages and different wording, you know, with their own handwriting.
And I'm like, oh, it's one of those things that goes round and round and round.
Yeah, I think it is.
Not coming to you?
So, did folks by chance bring this from our last meeting? By chance? No? Okay. Well, I guess you'll be taking some notes based on some of the things that we talked about out of here. So, cool.
I can go get my mind on my lap.
You didn't get one last time? Okay.
In Hawaii, on a beach.
Oh, no, that's okay. We'll make.
If I knew you better, I'd call you names.
You can, I don't care.
I will. I'll make sure you get a copy.
Sorry, I didn't sound
I'm gonna run and grab my phone.
Oh, well, all right.
Go grab it.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
5 minutes, we're back to you.
Yep, that's fine. I'll just take it off at the back end. Has anyone seen that that TV show Touch? Touch? Why did I like?
interesting.
I cried, I sniffled, and I did the full cry snot.
Oh, wow. He first other one. Oh.
Yeah, I don't know
I
that.
didn't watch the second one. I've only watched the first
Oh, I didn't know that there was a second one. So I don't know how they're going to keep up that level of emotional intensity for the rest of the time.
You just saw the first.
I just saw the first one.
Okay. Because I
Yeah.
saw the pilot, like how.
Well,
they
the
got-
pilot was the first one.
Oh, so I didn't make that.
No, you
Because
haven't.
I've been waiting for the second one.
Yeah.
Because they
So,
showed the pilot a few months ago too.
oh, okay.
And then, when was it? Was just last night.
Well, I saw it on Hulu, so I don't watch television. I mean, it sounds hippier than
Well,
it is,
apparently you
but I watch. No, I watch I watch everything second run or whatnot. Syndicated stuff or whatever.
It was on, I bet it's recorded, we're on TiVo. I think it was on the TV we're gonna be on tonight.
Okay.
The second one.
But it was amazing. It was amazing. I was just like,
The end was pretty cool.
yeah, that was bad when he gave him a hug.
That got me a little bit too.
Yeah. So it was that got me to, and then the dad in the picture in Tokyo, and then the Unabomber kid, you know, all of that was like.
Good one with the dad.
Oh, and the last one where he listens to his answering machine. He listens to his answering machine.
Yes.
And it's like, that was, you know, so, ooh, about to tear up right now.
The way they had it all come together is with some good writers.
Really good. That's what I'm saying. I don't know how they can keep, that was a lot.
They put a lot into that.
And then, yeah. So,
And it is unique too. It's nothing like you've ever seen before.
no, it's not. I mean, it's like bits and pieces of stuff. Philosophy is, it's more like Lost, I think, than anything else that, you know.
Because Lost ended late.
That was really cool.
I was like, I watched this 6 or 7 years, and I don't understand what happened.
Yeah. Lost was lame. It,
I was addicted to that show.
all right. Well, it looks like we're all here, and all the important people are obviously here. So we'll go ahead and get started. And so what I'd like to do is ask you first any questions, and then we'll do a little bit of review to build on what we're talking about today. Today we'll talk about meeting management, like how do you organize meetings and actually manage them. So that will be our agenda for today. Are there any questions or comments that folks want to start off with? And what is your name again?
Me?
Yes. Nicole. Nicole wasn't with us last time, so does anyone want to just give her some quick notes about what we may have talked about or things you may have gotten that were useful from the last time we were together?
We played that game where where one person was a facilitator and then everybody else had roles and the facilitator had to manage the meeting. And we all played pretty obnoxious little characters. So that took up a lot of the time.
Yep, so we went over the roles and then how to respond to those individuals in a group. Yep, we talked about easy, how to ask open-ended questions.
I think as a facilitator, the one thing that stuck in my mind is not to give your opinion.
Okay,
That was something that was hard for a few people, I think.
okay.
Because you're not the one time.
Yeah.
Facilitator.
So facilitating, and the acronym or the mnemonic device we used was easy, right? Facile, meaning in Spanish and Latin, easy. And so what she's referring to is this last part, your ideas as a facilitator are not shared. And so one of the, and I'll go ahead and do these as well. So elicit responses, ask open-ended questions, summarize people's ideas or paraphrase, blah, blah, blah. So that's that. One of the things I do want to take a second just to talk about in terms of this facilitator's role being easy is that there's a difference when you are facilitating a process and you're actually giving information or you're training or teaching. And so a lot of times really good facilitators will say, hey, I'm going to take off my facilitator hat right now, and now I want to teach you something about a concept or an interaction or some kind of skill. And so that's important to remember as well, that as a facilitator, this is your job when you're trying to have the group do some work to be a facilitator. But if you're actually trying to provide information, or you're trying to get them to understand a concept, then you switch out of this role into a teaching mode or into information delivery mode. So don't feel bound by this, but just know the purpose of why you're opening your mouth. So am I really trying to get the group to do some work, or am I actually relaying information? Because those you have to switch between those skills. So there's that. So very good. Thank you for sharing that. Other thoughts, comments from last time that'll be great for Nicole to hear before we do a little bit of review and then get into today's.
Well, we talked about Dr. Williams last time, the choice theory and the difference belonging and safety, and then also about ropes.
Yep, we talked about ropes, and we used ropes to set up ground rules, right? And so again, we talked about that being a mnemonic device. I like using mnemonic devices just because it's easy to do that. And so, so we just talked about using ropes as a, thank you.
Easier in your wardrobe.
Yes. So we talked about this being a framework for developing ground rules of how people will interact, and this was just a model. I like metaphors, and I talk about the ties that bind us together. And if you break one piece of spaghetti, it's easy, but if you put them all together in a bundle, it's difficult to break. Blah 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 blah. So I like that concept. And typically, what we talk about is respect or openness or participation, education, or sense of humor or sense of purpose, that kind of stuff. So really using that to establish some stuff with your groups is important. Other things that folks thought were important or useful tools. Have you been able to use any of the stuff that we've kind of talked about, either theoretically in how you deal with people, change how you deal with people, or some real practical ways of setting up your groups and working with folks? Yes.
Well, I've been trying to look at it from the perspective that we all step into different shoes first thing in the morning, and just because you get up and you get dressed to come to work doesn't mean we're trained and come across your path and different things happen on the way to work. And so however they start out, maybe then teach others or direct their attitude for the rest of the day.
Okay.
And how to move beyond that.
Okay. Cool. Other folks? And I shared this before, but I really, once I had a better understanding of attitude and its relationship to goal setting, I've really been able to deal with people much more effectively, professionally as well as in my personal life. Because it's easy to get distracted by the negative attitude that people display and not focus on the real problem or the real solution, which is helping them to achieve their goal. And even myself, when I find myself in a bad mood or a bad attitude, I have to readjust and reassess myself. What is my goal from this? What am I accomplishing by having this frame of thought or this mindset? So there's that. Just want to do a little bit of review. We talked about being goal oriented. And what did we identify as the three primary goals that people have? They were mentioned a little bit earlier in our conversation. Yep, safety is one. Belonging. And what was the last one? Oh, signs of the time. sign so we got safety, we have belonging, and significance.
Everybody's like,
I couldn't like totally give it away, so sign, significance. All right, so these are the three goals that people typically are trying to achieve or go after. And when we move towards our goals, we're said to be what? Starts with pro and ends in active. Proactive, yes. And then when we move away from our goals, we're said to be reactive, right? And I was having a conversation, they were having a difficulty understanding how being reactive is moving away from your goals. And what I tried to explain is that any off-purpose behavior is responding negatively to your goal, if that helps at all. That any off-purpose behavior is taking you away from your goal. So you're reacting negatively to your goal, if that's helpful.
I just had an email like that from a client today. They basically said, well then I'm just not gonna do that. And I'm like, but your goal is to do that.
So how did you?
I did not respond via email because I knew that was not going to go anywhere. So I called and I just kind of read into it and we talked about it and everything went fine.
Okay.
But I knew that as soon as I read that email, she did not. I sent out the first email and she did not. She read it the way she wanted to, and it was reactive. You know, so she didn't understand what I was trying to say or whatever, but it was very reactive against what her goal was, and then so I just called her. I feel like phone calls are a lot better communication.
Yeah, they are. It's typically, yeah.
Yeah, especially when you get an email that's a little.
Well, it's really funny because Cindy and I, when we called in Roxy Moore on a case once, Maxie.
Yeah.
We called her in on a case because it was very interesting that our proactive strategies was actually damaging the family and causing them to become more reactive to our implementation. And it's funny because as a government entity, and please don't take this the wrong way, but we operate, the system operates from a deficit model as opposed to looking at gifts and talents of folks. And so we are typically responding to a lot of stuff as opposed to actually being able to give some people some proactive stuff. And I think the folks in this room are really good at giving people proactive things, but I think the system as a whole is designed to be responsive to, to people's needs, and people only come to us when they're in trouble, right? And so one of the things that we had to do in our analysis, we figured out that the best thing for that particular family was to take us, being the county, out of their life. Because the more we intervened, the more problems we saw, which meant that we had to pour more resources to alleviate that problem, which also meant that we saw more problems and blah, 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 blah. And so, and I don't even know how the kids are now, but I know that we had to take ourselves out if that family was actually going to function effectively. And that kind of is and so attitude is based on the achievement of the goal or the limited access that one might have to their goal, right? So we've talked about that. I want to shift that over a little bit into looking at groups' responsibilities, and as leaders of groups and of meetings and working with folks. Many of you know this model in terms of child responsibility and adulthood and tweenness, right? So here we have individual responsibility on this end, and then we have group responsibility on this end. And and if we think about this, this would be childhood, where there's little responsibility on the individual's part, and then here would be adulthood, which is where the individual has a lot of responsibility on their own. And so part of our job is to hit the sweet spot in terms of working with our groups, that as the leader, I have some responsibility, but the group also has responsibility. All right? And so we've got to measure how do we get this even balance of responsibility on both parts so that we have an effective team. Because if we don't, what typically happens is this kind of stuff, where we have the top and then we have the stuff down. And the people at the bottom typically don't have a lot of, or don't feel that they have a lot of responsibility for what the top does. And then the top takes all the responsibility and puts it on themselves. And you can tell that you're in a top-down situation when you hear people say, "Are you coming to my meeting?" Right? Are you, my door is always open. They have taken the ownership of everything and put it on them. And they typically get frustrated when other people don't participate because they have internalized that process as being their own when we look at top-down. And what I'd like to suggest partially for today is that we look at kind of a flat and round organization. Instead of having hierarchical pieces, that we actually kind of squish that down and then we spread some of the assignments around the group and around the room. All right? So I'm going to pass out a survey, and then I want us to process through that survey and then talk about how do we move from this top-down model that oftentimes we've inherited to kind of a flat and circular model. All right? Does that make sense at all? Okay, sort of. Okay. We'll just keep moving. So there is a front and a back, and there are 25 questions. And I just want you to, the answers will be for you to, you don't necessarily have to share those answers, and I'll get the door. Actually, just do page 102 and 103, and then we'll do the rest of that at a different point. I'm gonna stop you right where you are, and then we'll come back and finish the rest of the stuff. On page 102, one of the first comments is, "Oh no, not another meeting." How many people have you ever said that, or have felt that, or heard people say that, or felt that? Typically, why do you think people dread this whole concept of meetings?
Not always feel like the best use of your time, or you're not taking enough out of it.
Okay, so it may not be the best use of your time, or you don't feel like you're getting anything out of it.
You feel like you're rehashing the same thing over and over.
You feel like you're rehashing the same thing over and over again?
You're too busy.
You're too busy? Okay.
I think the goal of whatever particular meeting it is sometimes really unclear, and you sit there and you feel like you're wasting your time.
So the goals are unclear, and so as a result, you feel like you're wasting your time. Okay. What else? I mean, those are really key. I mean, those are core pieces that you just mentioned. Is there anything else?
I think maybe sometimes you can go participate because they don't feel like your voice is being heard, and they, even though people encourage participation, it's like, why am I wasting my time saying this again because you don't listen?
So people don't feel valued in
Yeah.
the process itself, or they may even think that it's you're just going through the motions anyway, right? Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I would encourage us to think about is that part of what gives us frustration is when we have this off-purpose behavior, when it's not really clear what we're supposed to be getting out of a situation, or why we're even doing it. I hate getting gas. I hate it.
Me too.
What? So I'm not alone. Okay. Right? Why do I hate getting gas?
You're talking
The
about
price?
Yeah, I'm talking about gasoline. I'm talking about gasoline. I knew there was going to be one. That's why you were in Hawaii, right? But why do I? And I also and this is real personal. I also hold my pee to the last minute, right? So you'll see. I'll be the. Woo! All right. Okay. Let's go. Why do you think I do that? I mean, it's a personality thing, but what do you think is going on for me around that?
It takes time.
It takes time, right? I could be doing other things, but this is one of the things that I have to do, right? I have to get gas. It's an extra 15 minutes out of whatever I'm doing, but I got to do it, right? Just like with our loved ones and our spouses or our partners, we have to invest that time in that person, or what? We lose them, right? We lose them, and maybe not physically, but emotionally, we might lose those connections. And so, oftentimes, I think we don't think about teams as a living organism, as a thing that we really have to take care of. And so we think of it as this external object that I don't have any connection to. And so it is imposed upon me to participate in this meeting. Well, one of the things that helps with that is changing it from a top-down to a real circular kind of flat meeting structure where everybody has responsibility for the agenda, for the information, for the convening, and all that kind of stuff. So typically, people don't. Okay, so here's the story. How many of you have children? Okay, cool. So I don't have children, but I'm an expert. People who don't have children typically are experts at. Yeah. Anyway, so this is a story that people have told me, and you tell me if this story is true, or what about this story is correct. That if there's a two-parent family unit, and there is a small child, involved in this family unit, that the primary caregiver is very attuned to the small child. And so if both of the parents are sleeping, and I mean really sound asleep, and there are buses going by and airplanes and traffic and all that kind of stuff, if the small child coos, burps, or cries, that the primary parent will wake up and respond to the child. Is that a true statement or a fair statement?
Sure. Yep.
True? Okay, for the most part. Now, in that same situation, there is a secondary parent who does not move. Given the same situation, blah, 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 is that also true or fair assumption? Right? Okay, I see a lot of nodding heads. What's the difference between the two? Time investment, okay.
Well, I think it's expectation or responsibility or
Okay.
whatever. The one has learned to tune out or not even notice because it's not expected. And
Okay,
the
so
other,
expectation, possibly responsibility, defined roles, okay. All right, so let's carry this little story on a little further. So let's say that there is a primary parent night out. And so now all the primary parents are up at a cabin, having fun and all sorts of stuff. And now the secondary parents are now left at home with the small child. Yes?
There's no cell phone contact.
There can be cell phone contact. But it's wee hours of the morning, the baby cries or coos. How does the secondary parent now respond?
get up.
They get up, right? And the getting up might be to call the primary parent and say what's going on. But they do respond, right? Why do they respond at that point? Because it's their role at that point.
More aware that the primary caregiver.
They're more aware of the primary caregiver has left. And they now are what? Completely responsible, right? And so in our groups, when people don't feel completely responsible for the group, they don't engage. Why? Because somebody else will. Why does the secondary parent not chime in? Because they know that the primary parent will. And so when we talk about our organizations and we're trying to get to the sweet spot of helping teams develop into maturity, one of the things we have to remember is that when we have this top-down kinds of thing going on with our groups, then people are not typically just going to be engaged because they know somebody else will, right? So they won't take responsibility for the team or the group because they know that somebody else will. All right. So let's go. I'm going to talk a little bit about the roles of a team that we've talked about last time, which is facilitator. Yes. So we talked a lot about the facilitator's role. I want to talk a little bit about the recorder's role. So in the classic sense of secretary of a group or secretary, what typically are we talking about when a person has a secretarial role in a group? They take notes, right? What else do they do? They clarify the discussion, all right? So they take the notes. What do they do with the notes? They distribute the notes, right? So in your packet, the page number is titled 31. is this concept, this mnemonic device called notes.
The one important factor of minute taking
Yeah.
is I don't get my opinion involved.
As a note taker, you do not become a blogger, right? You don't get to you whatever is said. You do your best to distill that information into legible notes. And so, again, these are tools that I use as a high school teacher. So they are simplistic, but I like for you to think about the larger, more sophisticated ways that we can also think about this. But they need to listen succinctly and keenly to what is being said, both in its context as well as the specific words themselves. Because I can say hello, or I can say hello, right? And so, given those two pieces, the context becomes kind of important. And so, as a recorder, it's kind of hard not to become a blogger and be able to and still give the sense of what was going on in the meeting. They also have to organize the notes, and so one of the things that I might suggest is that for whatever your group meetings are, that there is a group a meeting notebook that either gets rotated to different individuals, or that that is either online or made available for people to put their notes in after each meeting. We say, this is our shelf where we keep our meeting notes. And so if anyone ever, and many of you do that as a part of case notes and that kind of stuff, where you're familiar with that process. So I think that's also important. And it's also, why do we meet in the first place? Let's back up just for a second. Why meetings? Okay, cool. To talk and accomplish a goal. To provide information.
To get more than one perspective.
To get more than one perspective on something, right? One of the things that, and I didn't bring I do a lot of videos and stuff in my trainings, and you guys know that. One of the guys that I think is really good, he's a street illusionist in Great Britain, in England, and his name is Darren Brown, and he did this experiment where he had one person go up to a jar of jelly beans, and he said, I want you to guess how many jelly beans are in that thing. And so the person guessed, and he took their answer and he put it to the side. And then he had a group of 30 people go up to the beans and guess, each one individually guess, and then he took the average of the large group, and he took the average of the large group and compared it to the one individual who guessed. Which of the two groups do you think was more accurate? The individual or the larger group? The group, that's why I'm telling this story, right? So the larger group was more accurate, and as a matter of fact, they were dead on with their average than the individual was as a single person. And so one of the things, that's important is that we get together because we need to get all of these perspectives out. All of us looking at an elephant is a lot better than one of us at the tail and the other one at the trunk, right? Which is kind of interesting that the trunk is in the front of an elephant, but that's just me. So the recorder also takes notes. So they take down everything, the goals, the things that were decided, and they make sure that they hold on to that information. They edit the information so that it's legible, and then finally they share that information in a succinct way. And so what are some of the ways that you share or you hold your current notes for meetings? How do those get captured?
Well, we do have a floor-wide book, and we've had one since 1998. It has the minutes and documentation of everything that has been
So how do some of the units do that? Is that different than the process you just, yes ma'am?
Oh, it's not much different. We just go, I like it, it's so simple. We just rotate minute takers and write on the agenda next to each item in the box. And that's right where we take notes. So we don't have to go back to our desk and then recreate our activity set. We just do it right there until we get the book.
Cool, cool, cool. Other folks?
We store it online. We have a shared drive that we keep all our notes in.
Okay, so you have a shared drive that you keep all your notes in. And who inputs that stuff? Is that
Well, typically our clerk, but we've been without one since October, so we've been rotating.
okay, cool. So you rotate among individuals. And how does that work in terms of the rotation?
People kind of volunteered for the first time, and then we just continue that same cycle.
Okay. Cool. So that's the responsibility of the recorders to take good notes. Right? So let's move on to page 103. As you on your handout here. And so as you went through that stuff, was there anything in that checklist that you were like, oh yeah, that's something I could use, or that's what we do already. We do this, this, and this. What were some of those things that you saw that you already do?
That top one, I know I use the top one.
All right, so having a detailed agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And there's a time for like 10 minutes with a topic, and usually pretty obvious.
Okay. Cool. And how does it get cut off after, let's say, 10 minutes of discussion? How does that happen?
We just move along.
Okay. Who moves along?
The supervisor.
The supervisor. Okay. Who convenes the meeting?
He does.
He does. Okay. And so he also drives the agenda?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
What if you go over your 10 minutes then?
I don't know when we really want to help people. I think that's just how we've always done it.
Yep, we're just good for you to do that. Probably done. Okay. Remember we used to do that? No? Been a couple of years? Or I don't know. But if everybody saw the agenda and I don't know if it was up for your unit, but if you see the agenda and you see that you only have 10 minutes, we really didn't go over a whole lot because everybody knew what the expectation was.
Okay.
And I think that even if you did go over on one thing, you overestimate the time on something else. So our meeting is never, I don't know that my unit meeting has ever gone over.
Well, and here, when we had like a hot topic that people were really giving great feedback on, and it kind of was having a life of its own, and it was a good discussion, we agreed to extend it longer for that specific topic because we felt that there was a need.
Other folks, as you look at that list, what are some things that you already do in your unit meetings? Yes, ma'am.
The minutes and expectations of who's going to do what is followed on getting that thing.
Okay.
That's been very helpful for those of us that are involved in lots of projects and stay on task and not drop the ball.
Okay.
That's been-
So that's been really helpful. So I have an action plan after
Yes.
the meeting.
Do you need help at our meeting?
You need help in your unit meetings? Okay. That's why they called me. I'm the orchid man for team meetings.
We don't do that. Except for there's a person in charge of bringing treats and babies and taking
Priorities.
Yeah.
But there's no minutes, there's no clear, nothing.
Well, you know what that means.
What does that mean?
It means that there's an opportunity to make this stuff happen. Here is an open gate to make this stuff happen. All right? So, yeah.
To let them know next time when I'm on the agenda.
Yeah. Well, and
You'll have to bring an agenda and pass it out and everybody's gonna be like,
With your treats.
that's a grand opportunity, which means you have a clean slate. So, because one of the things what unit are you in? What unit? Nicole? The DD? Okay. So one of the things that sometimes happens, and in HR we've tried to make sure that we're consistent about this, is that people will take a top-down approach where this is the supervisor and this is all of us. And they'll try to squish it down so it's a flat circular organization, but they forget one principle. So this is what typically ends up happening, that the supervisor becomes the center of the circle, and then we all kind of orbit around the supervisor, which ultimately ends up being the same as this system, where we're not really responsible or feel responsible for the group because we don't really have any responsibility. So one of the things that I might offer as a solution or a tool to increase people's, to get to the sweet spot where there's individual responsibility and group responsibility at a nice balance, is that we talk about the roles of the team in the team meeting, as opposed to the supervisor always being the facilitator, the supervisor always being the person who manages the agenda. And so, so then what happens is that your facilitator and your recorder, and I'll talk about this last piece here, which is the process observer's role. That those three roles get rotated between individuals so that one person is not always the convener. That one person's, and it sounds like you have part of that in your group, right? Where you rotate roles.
But an unspoken agenda, like we do the same thing every time, it's not written, but nobody takes minutes, and it's kind of like word of mouth about any information that got out, unless it's super important, then there's an email.
Yeah.
But yes, so it's way less formal than everybody else is talking about. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Big thing. Yeah.
And there is a balance between being extremely formal. I mean, because how many people use Robert's Rules of Order in their team meetings? Right? Yeah, that's unheard of, right? So there's that part of that end of the spectrum of being a formal, and then it sounds like you guys are on the other end, where it's just kind of a little looser than you feel comfortable with.
I like that it's not all written down like the agenda. I think that's kind of cool.
Yep.
But I find that it gets long and it's not as goal oriented. So that part is not only frustrating me, but probably everybody.
Yep.
I've heard that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
But I think people don't want it to be super rigid either. But there probably needs to be something else.
There needs to be. You're right. And one of the things I was talking with. So I'm on the juvenile diversion board for North Star Boy Scout Council, because they do this, diversion from going to juvie or ending up in Lima Lakes or whatever. And so we were talking about how do we make the program so that it has a solid skeleton, but then that each group, each instructor can riff off their own stuff. And so, so one of the things that I shared with the group is that, I don't know, how many people have seen a jazz band before? Okay. Anybody seen Whose Line Is It Anyway, or been to one of those improv shows, right? So if I'm a jazz musician and there's a jazz band playing, I can pick up my instrument and join in and play jazz with them, no matter what they're playing. And to folks like us, or if I'm an improver, right, I can play any improv game that they're playing, and it seems like magic. Right? You're like, oh my God, how do they get that? Blah, blah, blah. Well, one of the things that jazz musicians and improvers have in the background is that they have a set of rules and principles that they must play by. And so once we know the rules and principles, then we can riff and we can create, our groups and our organizations the way that we choose. But it's important that we all understand these principles. For example, we must have notes and minutes. How those get written down or used for, it could be online. It could be in a notebook. It doesn't really matter, but that's one of the principles that we probably should have as a group, right? That we should have an agenda. That's probably a principle that we should have as a group, that we should probably set a time aside. And so once we get those basic principles, I can play with anybody. I can, I pick up my guitar or my saxophone and really riff, because we all have the same kinds of principles. And so a lot of the stuff that I'm trying to give today, or at least talk about, are some of these basic principles that, you can create how it happens. But I think once you've established the principle itself, it becomes a lot easier to get to some of that stuff. And so, rotating the roles around, in HR, we have a list, and we do it for 6 months. So everybody knows who the next facilitator is, who the next recorder is, and so forth and so on, because it takes some stress. But it also adds responsibility to the individual to get their act together, so they can, the treat person knows what they're supposed to do, the facilitator knows what they're supposed to do, and then the note person knows that they have to get that information back to us. And so sometimes it's stress to do that, because people hadn't thought ahead or hadn't planned. However, they do take responsibility for making sure that it happens. Even if they're not the one to do it, they figure out a way to get that stuff covered. So, there's that. So, I want to, so let's diagnose our meetings. And I know many of you have started that, so we'll do this, these 20 questions, and then we'll take a break because it's hot in here, and get some water, and then we'll come back. All right? So if you can just finish those 20 questions, or 25 questions rather.
Do you mean like our unit meetings, or this particular?
I would like for you to think about your unit meetings. Think about this in terms of your unit meetings. Because I think that's going to be the most effective for you in terms of taking it back and seeing where some changes could happen. So after folks are done, let's take a 7-minute break and we'll come back at 32 after. Oh. But I think you're fine.
Yeah, I said my whole thing to exactly. I came back and I said, oh, where's the stuff inside of me? This doesn't apply to me. Yeah, I don't know.